G5A asked us to make a work about freedom. It's one of the values that they cultivate in this space. And they said we could interpret it any way we like. And then we thought about what freedom means. I discussed it with friends, and we came to this understanding that freedom is something that never exists. We think of this time not being free and some other, like we have lost our freedoms, but in that past time, there was someone else looking for freedom. So it's something that is never there. It's a shifting horizon.
So I feel like our live audience in Bombay is, in a sense, implicated in the pre-recorded footage that you have in the 2-channel and then in the projection. So in a sense, we become there's a new kind of togetherness that's formed out of the live performers, the live audience, the crowd here. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think there are a bunch of elements in the space. One is a 2-channel video, one is the performance, and there's a sound piece. And each of it has its own internal logic and structure, whereas the 2-channel video is more linear. It is a narrative, whereas this loop behind us is a more longish, real-time sort of a loop. In some sense, what the performance really does, or what we were aiming to do, is that it sort of takes little cues from each of this and sort of brings it out into the space. In some sense, that becomes the bridge between the audience and these objects or these visuals or the images in some sense. And they go back and forth.
So welcome everyone again. And the idea for this little conversation is that we get to speak to Poorna and to Amshu, and that's going to be a little conversation with me. I'm Mort Chatterjee from Chatterjee and Lal Gallery, and then maybe we'll open it up to questions afterwards. I needed to start tonight with a disclosure being that I've worked with both Poorna and Amshu. Tara and I have worked with. I also need to make a disclosure. I think I've worked with more than half the people in this audience, which is fantastic. So it's a really lovely group of people. So I think it would be really nice to open it up for questions afterwards. As I said, the second time I'm viewing the performance, the installation piece as well. Last night when I was thinking through the word which kept on coming back to me was shapeshifting, and this idea of shapes literally, figuratively being moved. In that case, the audience itself being moved, the performers in the space with these triangles, are they borders? The circle, is it a star? Is it a moon? These shapes, both in terms of your own practices, constantly shifting. In that sense, is that a leitmotif that both of you recognize? It's called, of course, Fragments of a Fugitive Poem. So I guess colliding with this idea of shapeshifting is the idea of the fragmentary. So to that end, maybe we'll start just with thinking about the genesis of the piece itself within that overarching idea of perhaps shapeshifting and the fragment.
Poorna and myself have known of each other's practices, and we've kind of seen each other in the last several pieces that we've made, we've discussed. So we kind of somewhere share a lot of commonalities. And it's good that you brought shapeshifting, because conceptually and formally we move and shapeshift across media. But also there's something of the modularity in the way we work, where the conceptual ideas go into sculptures, they move into video, they move into objects, they move into performance. So in that sense, a lot of our work is modular and shape shifts itself. So I think those are as like a gesture, that's what we sort of began with. When I first met Poorna, I went to Delhi and I was like, okay, where do we start? So we had a blank piece of paper in front of us, and then we started throwing ideas at each other.
And this was in response to G5A. I mean, how did it?
Yeah, Poorna.
Yeah. So G5A asked us to make a work about freedom. It's one of the values that they cultivate in this space. And they said we could interpret it any way we like. And then we thought about what freedom means. I discussed it with friends, and we came to this understanding that freedom is something that never exists. We think of this time not being free and some other, like we have lost our freedoms, but in that past time, there was someone else looking for freedom. So it's something that is never there. It's a shifting horizon, and freedom is wrought, right, through certain acts and permissions and actions. And we started with that as a conceptual premise. And at the same time, we asked where we were at with our own practices. Amshu works a lot with landscape. And the landscape I've been working with is the landscapes of India and Pakistan, because I'm translating the exile poems of Fahmida Riyaz. And I spent the last year sort of going between India and Pakistan, trying to put together her story. So we kind of put those ideas together. And that was our starting point.
Yeah. And something, Amshu, which you said a little earlier when we were speaking, is this idea of whether the concept, in a sense, precedes the form or the form precedes the concept. And I think you made the point that perhaps in both of your practices, you are perhaps more conceptually driven in terms of your practices. So would you agree that in this case, this was the idea of freedom in a sense, gave birth then to the form itself? Or would you say that what I've seen is that some of the leitmotifs, which I'm familiar in your practice, sound especially, which of course we've seen, even things like the loudspeaker, which I remember from previous performance. Amshu, two-channel, beautiful, this idea of the fictional and the non-fictional. So I guess it's that tension, right, between the conceptual and the form, which you play with constantly, kind of butting up against each other. Is that a fair?
I think one of the first things when we started when Poorna told me about the kind of a conceptual invitation of the idea of freedom, we told ourselves that we will not sidestep too much from what we are already preoccupied by, a conceptual preoccupation or a formal preoccupation. So in some sense, all of this, while we were making this work, was simultaneously happening in my studio as well as Poorna's studio in terms of her research or whatever. So this kind of unraveled parallel to the practice itself. So it kind of spilled in. So that was already prevalent.
Yeah, I also think it's a good way to put it, the tension between the conceptual and the formal. Because both of us love material, whether it's the body or whether it's rock. But so we oscillate. But I think we're kind of interested in, okay, if this is my idea, how best can I relay it? We don't get bogged down by, well, I'm a choreographer and therefore it is only going to be a dance. And we're a bit, I don't know, I would say roguish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, one feels that. So talk to us a little bit about the team then that you put together to actually execute this incredibly ambitious, project.
Yeah, I just want to take the time to thank Spitting Image, Parda Fash, Anirudh, and Shomik, who were there with us, and Dipna, who was the other performer, Hadi Khatri, who helped us shoot in Karachi, and
Fahmida Firdaus in Delhi, and also a lot of people who we have hours of interviews which you just have snippets of. We can't tell you the names because part of it was the condition was like, you don't have to reveal your name. We know their names, but they said they would be anonymous voices. But yeah, so those are the contributors to this work. But yes, the sound was a big element. I've been working with sound a lot, and Amshu has as well. Mm-hmm. And we invited Spitting Image to come on board.
Yeah. And also I've heard of each of their practices. There are 3 of them. And I really like their work, and I introduced Poorna to them. But also within their own practices, they also touch upon various ideas of formally or conceptually with the things that we are working with, So some sense that sort of helped.
Yeah, for instance, Sandhya, who plays under the moniker Parda Fash, and she's playing tomorrow at 7.
Please come.
Yes, please do. She has been playing electronic music using samples from protests. So we sort of saw resonances in our between our interests and theirs, and so they seemed like the ideal people to collaborate with.
Yeah. So of course, Fahmida Riaz hangs heavy over throughout. Is kind of this whole piece is marinated in her poetry, her thought, her life, her biography, both I think enacted in reality in some of the sound pieces, but also fictionally. Maybe please give us a little insight into who she was for those of us who don't know. And also, Amshu, I'd love to know your response to her practice. I presume this is the first time you're working around her in any kind of... Yeah.
So Fahmida Riyaz was a poet and dissident, a feminist poet, Marxist, who lived in Pakistan. When Zia-ul-Haq, a military dictator, he took power in a coup in 1977, Fahmida Riaz, who ran a very dissident political magazine, came under the scanner. The magazine was eventually banned, and she was slapped with multiple cases of sedition. And the threat with the charge of sedition was that you could be hanged. Zia-ul-Haq's reign is also known for public hangings and floggings. So there was, in a sense, a real threat. There are other poets like Faiz Ahmad Faiz and Faraz, other left-wing poets who were jailed or they fled. And so Faraz and Faiz fled to Europe. But Fahmida Riaz was a woman, and there's a gendered element to this, and she could only go so far as India. So there was, this is a bit speculated. Some people say there was an invitation that arrived. Some people say that it was arranged for. So she boarded a plane to Delhi with very little intention of coming back.
What year would this have been?
This was in 1981. And then the Indian government, even though she was a Pakistani, gave her permission to stay. They gave her a job. So she worked at Jamia and JNU, and she spent the next 7 years in exile in India. Once Zia-ul-Haq died in a plane crash and Benazir Bhutto came to power, she felt like, okay, a new time is coming, and she went back. But she was kind of disappointed eventually with what she found. And India was the hopeful land, but then after Babri, that came apart for her as well. And she wrote a very famous poem about India saying, "You turned out just like us." She did go back and forth over the years. She was accused of being an Indian agent in Pakistan, right? And in India, she was forever the Pakistani who didn't belong. And so she was really preoccupied with land and borders and how to tear them down. And the final thing towards the end of her life, and the way I read this, is that the poetry became insufficient. The short line became insufficient. So she started writing prose. She wrote a trilogy of novels, one set in Pakistan, one set in Bangladesh, and one set in India. And the one set in India is set between Bombay and a hill station in Maharashtra, which we might understand as Khandala, maybe. And that novel is about the rise of Hindu nationalism in India. And this was written for a Pakistani audience.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Would we be able to find her work is it still published in
English?
Yes.
Yeah. So the novel about India is called Godavari, and there has been an English translation.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, Poorna had shared this article with me long back. And then when G5, the article at Caravan on Fahmida Riyaz, I had read it and it stayed with me. And when Poorna, when G5 invited us, we were thinking about what to do. I said, let's take from there.
Yeah.
And not to sort of emulate the article, but let's use it as a springboard to kind of think of other things,
Yeah.
And I was also interested in this one thing within that article where Poorna finds a series of photographs from her family archive that captures Fahmida in Bombay at an event. And for me, that photograph was a opening point to kind of think of how does one recreate an event, maybe?
Yes.
Or how does one recreate a landscape? And that was, I think, the proposition. How can we think of landscape or this event or this point in time? But how do we think of this across times?
Yeah.
right? How does this sort of repeat itself cyclically? And that's in some sense.
And maybe you could expand then into talking about how landscape itself is so important within your own practice, and maybe how then you've used oftentimes fictional landscapes, sometimes actual landscapes, to present very substantive narratives. And in this case, how did you perhaps go about that?
So Poorna and I started shooting in several locations. We were in some sense mapping Delhi and Bombay and remotely Karachi.
Oh, can I just add one thing before that? Yeah. So the premise of this work was a poem by Fahmida, which she wrote in Pakistan. She brings the manuscript over to India and it's first published in Hindi. Friends smuggle it back across the border. And then only 5 years later is it published in Zia's Pakistan. And so we were really interested in the trafficking of this manuscript, and it's a book-length poem in 6 chapters. So we thought, well, what if that poem was never finished?
Or what if this poem was a witness to the landscapes it travels into or within or back and forth, So in some sense, that became an exercise to just go out and shoot in Delhi, in Bombay, and sort of retrace or map these cities and Karachi. And we also did an exercise where we interviewed people, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how we're going.
Yeah, so we read this poem and we picked out the questions of that recurred in the poem. And she often says, I'm going away. And every time she says, I'm going away, she says something different. So, and then there are other points where she keeps coming back to the desert. She says that, in the aridness of the desert, that's where my poetry lies. And then, but she also comes back to the sea because she is from Karachi. And the sea is also this formative material. So we kind of made a list of the recurring landscapes and questions. And then we took those to people and we said, where are you going? Where have you come from? Can you describe the place you are going? And so we started with very basic questions and they sort of became more philosophical the more we spoke to people.
Or even someone just describing the house.
In Delhi and Bombay, this was actually you, Amshu, being the interlocutor?
No, both of us.
Both of you
were on the shoot. I was doing the camera, but both of us were sitting and like we had planned all this before we went out. And when I wasn't in Delhi, Poorna went about with her camera and Hadi in Karachi.
With the same set of questions.
With the same set of questions and outlines in some sense.
Amazing. So in a sense, landscapes also are obviously peopled, very much peopled in this work. So can you perhaps talk to us about where the role of the figure, the audience, the crowd comes into this piece? Because I feel like our live audience in Bombay is in a sense implicated in the pre-recorded footage that you have in the 2-channel and then in the projection. So in a sense, we become there's a new kind of togetherness that's formed out of the live performers, the live audience, the crowd here. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think there are a bunch of elements in the space. One is a 2-channel video, one is the performance, and there's a sound piece. And each of it has its own internal logic and structure, whereas the 2-channel video is more linear. It is a narrative, whereas this loop behind us is a more longish, real-time sort of a loop. Whereas the audio is more first-person recreation of...
It's archival sound from Fahmida's own recitation in Bombay.
And in some sense, what the performance really does, or what we were aiming to do, is that it sort of takes little cues from each of this and sort of brings it out into the space. In some sense, that becomes the bridge between the audience and these objects or these visuals or the images in some sense. And they go back and forth.
Yeah. And I would say that what we wanted to do was create a landscape.
Yeah.
So, you could come in and walk through it and find what you will.
Yeah.
And whoever comes in is going to walk in at a different point in the loop and have a different experience.
Yeah. And maybe another thing is that we've both worked with you in some sense, and you're aware of our work and what we wanted to actually ask you some things And just your...
Maybe not.
But yeah, I mean, just if you could tell us about your work with performance mainly and multidisciplinary practice.
Well, yeah.
And especially also with us, but outside of this.
Certainly coming into the black box at G5A, immersing myself in this installation and performance was very powerful. And in some sense, I was very jealous because I thought, this is something that I could see in a gallery space because of the nature of the work itself. So obviously it's completely blown apart the kind of proscenium theatre environment, and it's become something else. At the same time, I think it's quite other. Actually, it's quite other than a quote unquote gallery space and what it's doing, especially in terms of I think the way that duration plays out in a space like this is very different. I know that I think in our case, Poorna, creating timed events in a gallery space can often be quite problematic because people are not used to being kind of kept within the boundaries of people float in and float out as they want to. And in fact, that's the way we normally come across performance. But certainly in our own case over the years, whether it's someone like Sahaj, who I can see in the audience, who's worked extensively with live performance, but also juxtaposing that then with oftentimes props, which become, in a sense, part of the performance piece. Nikhil Chopra, who's also been working around, but again, he often gives himself a task, as it were, through a performance. Hiten Patel, certainly, who has been working with video and live work. But in terms of a historical trajectory, we were lucky enough to show Nalini Malani, and she's someone who I would certainly speak about in the context of what we see in Fragments.
When was this?
For a fugitive. Well, I'm just saying Nalini's work generally, we have shown her at our gallery, but since the 60s, she's been thinking through ideas of video and then into live performance, working alongside sculptural form. So for me, what becomes interesting, especially at a moment when, in a sense, there's been a return to painting and the overarching kind of dominance of painting in the gallery space, is whether a space like G5A has now become, in a sense, in the absence of galleries perhaps showing more performance-based work, the natural setting for a piece like this. And I think only time will tell going forward, yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because for me, Poorna's invitation was, in some sense, a new opening to experiment things that I couldn't have otherwise done in different settings. So in some sense, it was, special. Thank you, G5A, for having us.
Just, if I can, thank G5A again for hosting us. And of course, to our wonderful performers and to the team behind Fragments. Thank you so much for giving us this experience. Amshu, do you want to?
I just want to thank G5A and the amazing team.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been incredible.
And Ishan and Anuradha and David and everyone else who helped us, Prashant, and
truly everyone. This
really,
has been
we couldn't have done this without you all.
There are very few spaces where we could make, actually probably, I can't think of another one where we could have made this work. Really thank you.
And happy 10th anniversary.
Thank you. Happy 10th anniversary.